It's often useful to divide a group of something that you're interested in into 2 or 3 parts to help you understand how it works. And so we're going to talk about 3 kinds of games. 3 kinds of games people like. First, all games are math, or games are all math. Second, games are about people. Third, games are about stories. Now, I've posed these in absolutes, and there's a great tendency for game fans to believe that all games are of the type that they like, when in fact there are 3 types of games. And they tend to discount the other types and have no interest in the other types. So somebody who likes games that are about people may not be interested in the mathematically oriented games. And somebody who thinks games are about stories may not be interested in a game that doesn't have an obvious story, even though it's about people most likely, because most stories are about people. So, games are all math. Puzzles fit into this category, something with an always correct solution. They are often subject to mathematical analysis. It's been shown, for example, that a chess match will always have the same result, although the proof did not say whether the same result was white wins, a draw, or black wins. Because chess is actually a puzzle. You have complete information, there's no uncertainty, and it can be analyzed. It's just too complicated for any human to fully figure out the solution. Checkers, on the other hand, is a rather less complicated game, and there was a famous master, Marion Tinsley, who over a very long period only lost 7 games and was consistently the world champion because he had figured it out. And there is now a computer program, Chinook, that plays checkers and virtually never loses because it has figured out a brute force solution, which is for every position on the board, it has in its database the move that is most likely to lead to a win from that position. But all this focus on calculation does not take into account the creativity and unpredictability of human players. I'll give you an example from one of my own games, Britannia. One person on a forum said that as long as he knew what the board state was, it didn't matter what the other players were intending to do. He didn't have to consider what the other players did. He just considered the board state. Well, this is a person who will lose Britannia, because Britannia is a game about people, ultimately. There is a game system, and the game system is fairly easy to play, but fairly difficult to master. And so people who have mastered the game system have an advantage. But still, when they come up against other people who have mastered the game system, an awful lot depends on the intentions of the players and what they're going to do. The people. And merely knowing what the board state is doesn't tell you enough to determine whether you're going to win the game. And that brings us to games that are about people. Even in a solo game, which is usually a puzzle, sometimes the player can divine the intentions of the person who made the game puzzle. But certainly where the opposition is human, you can read the opponent's intentions. That's called yomi by David Serlin, a Japanese word for reading. And the best players against humans often rely on yomi to be successful. Poker is an epitome of this. Poker has a very simple game system with a lot of randomness in it, but the best poker players do not simply ride the odds of the game system. They figure out the tendencies of the other players and they bluff and so on. Games for 3 or more players are often dominated by negotiation, whether it's overt negotiation or a kind of sideline negotiation. And you can put in the rules of a game, that you prohibit negotiation. But unless you also prohibit the players from talking or using body language, then there's still negotiation. Somebody can look at the board and say, well, so blah, 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 so-and-so is ahead because this, that, and the other. That's negotiation even if he's not directly talking to any one other player. Well, sometimes this is called politics by the math types who clearly do not like it and are uncomfortable with it. And that's why they use a word that has many pejorative meanings these days. I mean, nobody thinks politics is good. Such games are very much not a popularity contest. And I'll go back to Britannia as an example again. One player who long ago had won the Britannia tournament at the World Board Gaming Championships asked me one day what he could do. Britannia is a 4-player game, and he said he did not want to negotiate. And I said, Dwayne, as long as you don't negotiate, effectively you're outnumbered 3-1, and it's going to be difficult. The key in many games with negotiation is you are outnumbered 2-1, 3-1, 4-1. In diplomacy, you're outnumbered 6-1. What are you going to do to change those odds? What can you do to influence the other players? That's games about people. Games are about stories. Well, stories are usually, but not always, about people. This view is becoming much more common, and if you've ever been to Gen Con, the biggest tabletop game convention in the country, it is a story convention. Everything is about stories. This originated largely with tabletop RPGs, which, of course, is where Gen Con derives from. It's been promoted in video games by the lifelike graphics and the photorealism. But the funny thing is, games are a poor medium for telling a story compared to film or even novels or plays. Nonetheless, a lot of people want to get their stories through games. And I'll have more to say about this in a separate lecture. So there's a big diversity of tastes. Recognize that all 3 kinds of games exist, and some people who like one kind just will not acknowledge that the other 2 even exist, or that they matter. And that's the way it is, and you have to take that into account when you design games.